Hello and welcome back to the Legal Cheek podcast. My name is Julia Szaniszlo. I'm a writer here at Legal Cheek, and today I'm joined by our very own editor, Tom Connelly.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on when you're listening to this.
So today we'll be talking about all things SQE. Ever since it was introduced in 2021, it's naturally brought its fair share of controversies. It was, of course, originally designed as an alternative to the LPC, a way to simplify and make more accessible the path to qualification. However, and one of the key pledges that the SRA made when it introduced the SQE was that it would disclose the pass rates of various course providers. This commitment has been pledged by a myriad of delays. It was originally said to be coming out in 2023, but as of yet, we're yet to see these pass rates. So, in this episode, we'll have a deep dive into what this means for students, what this means for the SQE, as well as taking a look at some of the other teething problems that the SQE has faced and is affecting student confidence in the exam. So, Tom, I was wondering if you could take us through this data disclosure pledge. What went on, what happened, and what does that mean for students who are looking to take the SQE?
Yeah, absolutely, Julia. Well, you probably got to go back at least 7, possibly 8 years when I was still writing legal news and getting involved in it directly. And the SRA kind of came out with this plan to say we're going to get rid of the LPC and we're bringing in the SQE. And one of the, as you've alluded to in your introduction, one of the key pledges it made and bringing transparency for students was they were going to provide data that looked at the pass rates among the various preparation providers, something that wasn't available under the LPC. So that was one of the justifications for moving to the new SQE, that this data would be available to students. And people like yourself who are, on the cusp of embarking on the SQE can have a look at the market. What are the options available? What are the study modes, and where you would like to put your hard-earned cash, because it's obviously not cheap to do many of these prep courses. So that was the big justification. Really exciting development from a news perspective as well, because we could obviously report on all of this. And it gave itself a self-set deadline of, I think it was late 2023 was the language it used on its website. And it was something that we kept an eye on. Late 2023, depending on what your view of that is. Is that early autumn? Is that kind of Christmas? Whatever it might be. But anyway, it got to the very end of the year. We spoke to the SRA, and it was unable to provide this data. Basically, and I'm going to make sure I get this quote correctly. It said it lacked sufficient data. So that was sufficient data at that point. And I
Yeah.
think it felt that, the SQ had only been around officially for 2 years at that point. It hadn't had enough students go through the process to have what it thought was sufficient data to kind of make these kind of comparisons. So okay, fair enough. Give the SRA the benefit of the doubt there. And anyway, fast forward to February 2025, so early last year now, and there was still no pass rates. And this time it was saying that there was unexpected problems with the data quality and didn't really provide much more detail beyond that. So again, no pass rates at this stage. And then over the course of last year, the SRA did face pressure to publish these results, not only from various law schools who were, trumpeting their own kind of pass rates on their websites. They were keen to, obviously, if a law school's doing particularly well on the pass rates, they want to promote and want to be kind of up there with their rivals and saying, we're the market leaders. So they were pushing for it to a certain extent. And even the Legal Services Board, which is like the overarching super regulator, even said autumn 2025, you need to be publishing this data. This was one of your key pledges. You need to honor that pledge and go ahead and publish the data. So anyway, autumn 2025 arrived. There was still no data. And then it might be a story that a lot of students missed. I almost missed it myself, and it came late on the 18th of December. So as people are kind of switching off for the year and thinking about Christmas, there was a major update that we reported on. And I think we were the only publication, strangely, that reported on this. I thought it would get picked up more widely, but it didn't. Um, and the SRA sort of conceded or appeared to concede that there was a flaw in how it was collecting that data, and it was still unable to publish the pass rate. So we've gone from we lacked sufficient data to unexpected problems with the data to actually we've been collecting the data wrong. And it's slightly complex, but I'll go into it just so people that are tuned in kind of have a better understanding in it. And apologies, but I'm actually going to read part of our news story or the news story that I drafted just because it is a decent summary of what exactly went wrong. And the issue lies in the way that the SRA collect this data, but also crucially its timing. So under the kind of the old model or the current model, I'm not sure if the SRA's corrected it just yet or whether they're thinking of doing it early this year, but students are currently asked to declare their training provider when they first create an SQE account with the SRA. This is often long before they've actually sat the SQE, started any sort of prep course. And as a result, the SRA says it cannot be sure that the data reflects how candidates actually prepared for these assessments. So basically, reading between the lines, what they're saying is, if it was you, Julia, signing up for this account, you might create this account long before you've decided, oh, I'm going to go with law school X
Yeah.
and do a full-time course. So it was lacking that information. And it's actually quite a simple fix that the SRA's done. But I mean, I'm quite surprised it didn't do this sooner, or at least saw that this was an issue and corrected it sooner. But to address this, the SRA will now change when it asks this question about how you prepared. So going forward, SQE students will be required to confirm their training provider, if any, because you could study it yourself. You don't have to go through a training provider just before they receive the results, at which point they will know how they've prepared for the assessment. So, I mean, it's red faces all round for the SRA really because they've made this pledge for late 2023 to produce this data. And it seems like, and I remember speaking to other people in legal treatment were like, how is it taking them this long to realize that that was the problem?
Yeah.
So it is quite embarrassing, and it probably didn't surprise anyone that this story kind of broke so late to Christmas because they were hoping, I presume, reading between the lines, they might have hoped that this would have just slipped under the radar. But fortunately, the keen eyes of Legal Cheat were there to report it.
Yeah.
And I guess the logical step is now, well, why should they be publishing this data,
Yeah.
these pass rates? And I guess that's probably, Julia, a good question for yourself because ultimately you'll be embarking on the SQE hopefully very soon. Now, whether you go through a traditional training contract at a firm and they tell you which SQE prep provider to go to, that's fine. But for a lot of students, they'll be looking at this market now that's got lots and lots of options from kind of just looking at, your established players that operated under the LPC market right through to all these new online offerings, some that just offer you the textbooks and you study alone, some that offer you kind of PowerPoints online. There's a whole myriad of choices for students. So if putting yourself, preparing for the SQE, how much do you think you would rely on this information?
Well, I think one of the key things about the SQE is that it's supposed to open up the options that you have for qualifying as a lawyer. And if that's the case, then you should be able to compare those options. I mean, it's really quite simple. You wouldn't make a massive purchase, you wouldn't buy a new phone without comparing the models. You wouldn't go, apply for a mortgage without comparing the models. I think it's a really expensive commitment for prospective students to make, and the fact that you cannot consistently tell the difference between, firstly, not only the course providers, but also the kinds of study that they offer. It's really quite damaging. I mean, for myself in particular, if I don't, I am aiming, of course, to get a training contract just for sort of monetary reasons, but I live abroad, and so I would want to look at course providers which were doing well on the online side of things because I think that's really important. It's not always possible, especially for people living in remote areas, even in the UK, to go and travel and go into the big cities and take the courses there. So what's the online one like? What's the online option like? And this lack of transparency, coupled with lots of the other factors, like high costs and the fact that some of these courses can run you almost up to 20 grand, not the actual SQE itself, but the prep courses, means that you want to know that you're getting your money's worth. It's not always possible for someone to drop that much money on something which they won't necessarily pass on the first attempt. A course which doesn't have a centralized textbook, for instance, is not consistent across the board. And there are so many other issues with the SQE that we can talk about later. But so I think it's not really a one problem of this data disclosure. It's all sort of coming together. And the fact that you just can't compare and you don't know and you're not sure means that people are probably being, put off a little bit from taking the SQE, from becoming solicitors. I remember when I was first looking into becoming a lawyer, I thought maybe I'll just take out a loan and just pay for the SQE myself. So I was looking online. And for me, it just confused me. I just saw so many of these small providers, these course providers, and I was like, is it worth going with them? But then is it worth going with ULaw? The advice was so murky and inconsistent. And yeah, it's just really hard to tell. And the whole point of the SQE is transparency. And the fact that they can't stick to those promises is worrying. And I understand that gathering this data is, well, it's difficult. But then, as you said, it was quite a simple fix, right? It makes sense to ask this sort of question at the end, right before they're going to take the exam itself. You know, it's not comforting. And yeah, it's a big commitment, and you expect to know what you're paying for. You want to see what's on the tin, essentially.
Yeah, no, very good point. And I like the analogy of, buying a new phone or doing a mortgage. You would ultimately shop around and do comparisons on whether you're getting a good deal. Um, with the SRA, I should also add that, we're not saying that they're never going to publish this data.
Yeah.
They do go on to say that the data requires contextualization is a word that they use quite a lot. And I think the SRA may have just misunderestimated the amount of different options that will be available to students. And then obviously there's other factors, including kind of diversity, background, university attended, all this information that can impact a student's performance on the SQE. So I can certainly understand why they want to contextualize this data. And they say that we'll be working with the support from external experts to publish contextualized data in 2026. And in the meantime, they point to the fact that they do provide kind of almost like bi-monthly reports on the pass rates of individual, SQE1, SQE2, but obviously that doesn't provide a breakdown of how a particular student studied or where they studied, should I say. So hopefully this year we will see some contextualized data being published by the SRA. It remains to be seen what that will exactly look like, whether that will literally be a league table of law schools and other SQE prep providers and them saying that this has got the highest pass rate, this has got the lowest, where do you stick your money? That remains to be seen, but it will be really interesting to see how the SRA deals with this because obviously they've made that pledge publicly and it seems like, giving them the benefit of the doubt, they do want to publish this data, but at the minute, they've just not been collecting it in the right manner, which has created a bit of a headache for them. But it was interesting, the timing of that story, I thought, just kind of so close to Christmas. They actually made a flurry of announcements alongside this one. They will be providing they are creating a new website or portal, I believe, where it will allow some sort of comparisons to be made. Again, it remains to be seen what exactly that will include. But obviously keep reading Legal Cheat because we'll keep our eye out for that and we'll let you know as soon as we do. But one thing that we did report alongside that, apologies, my phone is ringing away. One thing that we did report alongside that was that the SRA published an independent report looking at student confidence in the SQE, but also employer confidence. Now, I know, Julie, you've been looking at a little bit at that. Could you just kind of just very broadly just summarize to students that haven't read that report or news item on it, just what exactly that independent report concluded?
So essentially, this report was based on research done by I think IFF research, and they asked both students and actually employers to rate their views on the SQE. I think they were on a scale of 1 to 10, no, 1 to 5, sorry. Um, one meaning strongly disagree, five meaning strongly agree. However, sort of the big takeaway from it was that students broadly had very low confidence in the SQE, whereas employers are actually turning around and feeling a little more confident in the way that it is, doing things, which is quite a contrast to when it first sort of was rolled out a couple of years ago now. But at the heart of the issue, at the heart of everything was concern is about fairness for students. So students are quite dissatisfied and quite wary with of the assessments. They think that they're not really constructed in a way that's fairly worded, especially the MCQ format. People find it really opaque, and it's specifically the SQE1 which uses the MCQs, the SQE2 doesn't. And they felt that the questions were almost designed to trick them, that they were extremely difficult to understand. Also, the fact that the difference between actually passing and failing seems to be so narrow, and it all feels very luck based, and you feel like you're guessing. Students named that as one of their sort of points of criticism, and of course, the big one is costs. These are obviously a major source of frustration. I think we say in the article that only 17% of candidates who take the SQE training think that the SQE training options are actually affordable. The exam fees themselves are not considered reasonable either, which I think it's a lot of money. And the I, qualifying work experience, they said that there was fine. Actually, people are quite positive about it, but then. So yeah, you've got this element of fairness and the MCQs, which we've reported on previously. The
Mhm.
SRA actually defended its use of MCQs in September, and there's a whole conversation about whether or not they're the right format or whether there's something else lying at the heart of that issue rather than the actual way that the questions are constructed. And then there's the question of costs. I think those are the two big pillars. But yeah, employees seem happy with it almost. Not happy, but definitely happier. There's risen in satisfaction, I think.
Yeah, I mean, for a large part, I think law firms just have to get on with it. You know,
Yeah,
that this is the new model. They need a pipeline of trainees. You know, they'll get through it. I think I was not surprised that there was a deterioration in student confidence just because they've been hit with issue after issue, whether it's kind of, and to the credit of the SRA, they have tried to correct some of these because I think there was one issue was like these online booking forms to get a sesh to get an SQE slot, and students reporting spending hours in online queues like they were trying to secure Glastonbury tickets or something like that. And they took steps to rectify that issue. But then there's been, I think the biggest one that sticks in my mind was students essentially being told that they failed
yeah,
when
yeah,
in fact they'd passed. And I mean, just getting through the exams is stressful enough but to be subsequently told incorrectly that you've been failed. And then some of these students had subsequently gone on to tell their employers or future employers that they hadn't passed and seen, I think we heard at least one report of students having their training contracts revoked off the
yeah,
back of this incorrect information. I mean, that was a huge blunder by, the SRA and the SQE prep provider Kaplan, I should say, because they run it, and that was a massive issue, and that will seriously knock the confidence that students have in this rigorous assessment because you saw just after that particular story, lots of students that had failed in um, previous rounds saying, well, had I failed? How do I know that I failed? Maybe that was incorrect. And it just created a huge amount of kind of panic and distrust among students for the SQ. So that this report didn't really tell me much that I didn't already
Yeah.
know. Um, and I mean, again, just to put the SRA side in that report, it acknowledges students' concerns, particularly around MCQs, and they accept that more could be or could have been done to sort of explain how that format would work when the SQE first came to launch. Um, and it's kind of taken steps to publish more kind of example questions, and they're trying to do more engagement with students, running workshops, working with the training providers, and doing their own technical views. And I just want to quote Julie Swan here, who's the SRA's Director of Education, off the back of this report. She said, the latest stage in our evaluation of the SQE shows increased confidence among employers. Yet we know that. We know about the strong performance of solicitor apprentices. That's something else that, you might have read on Legal Cheek. Solicitor apprentices appear to be doing much better than those on training contracts on the SQE, perhaps because of that practical element of embedded learning, doing kind of your qualifying work experience. Um, and it's so they take that as a positive. They kind of lean quite heavily on that. She continues, some of the candidates' responses recorded relate to early sittings of the SQE and reflect the problems that candidates unfortunately encountered, teething problems in the early days. Over the past 2 years, Kaplan, the assessment provider, has made improvements to the booking system, which obviously I
Yeah.
touched upon there. And we have published additional resources to help candidates understand and prepare for these assessments. We will continue to respond where we can to feedback. Um, I think just maybe just one final question for yourself, Julia. As someone that's hopefully within the next potential year or so will be embarking on the SQE. How do you feel about it?
I mean, having spoken to lots of TC offer holders who are, that's their next step. I'm terrified, really. Not necessarily because of the actual difficulty of the exam. I think it's well within its right to be a difficult exam. It's a profession which requires, rigorous legal knowledge. You can't make it easy. So I'm sort of accepting the fact that it's going to be hard and stressful. But I'm just a bit nervous about the fact that nothing seems controlled. It all seems in a bit of a free fall state. And I know the SRA are making the effort to try and change things, but it's just, it's a little bit, yeah, I have a bit of a lack of confidence in the way that it works. And I'm particularly nervous. I mean, about whether or not, if I get my training contract, if I get the offer, and the pressure and the fear of needing to pass the first time round, potentially maybe the second time round, it depends, I guess, on the firm. And then having that pressure hang over you and thinking, oh, I might actually lose this job that I've worked extremely hard to get. Um, that's I know lots of people who simply went on to do their law conversion and then the SQE and self-funded it because they were in that position to do that themselves. And that's not an option for me. And what makes me nervous for other people as well is that it was supposed to increase accessibility, and yet it's just making people stressed and nervous. But I'm under no illusion. I don't think that it has to be made, like a simple exam. I don't think we need to do away with MCQs. I just wish the SRA could, I don't know, they are putting in the effort, but I wish they could just provide a little bit more transparency. To be honest, I'm still at the first hurdle. I want that training contract first. And so, in a way, the SQE has sort of only vaguely entered my mind. But speaking to people at Legal Cheek, like Ryan, our colleague, he was like, "Oh God, I'm terrified. It's so scary." But you just have to do it. There's no choice. You have to pass, otherwise you might lose your offer, and then you're toast. So I suppose
Yeah.
a mixture of nerves and acceptance. It's all a bit complicated, I guess, like the entire process.
Yeah, exactly. Well, hopefully 2026 is a year of transparency and ironing out some of these teething problems. Well, thank you very much for joining me, Julia.
Yeah, thank you, Tom.
You've been listening to the Legal Cheek podcast. You can get it on Spotify and what do they call it now? Apple Podcasts if you want to listen there. This is a weekly feature, so do keep tuning in. But thanks very much for joining us, and we'll catch you on another podcast.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye bye, everyone. See you next week.